This is NDTV. And you're watching NDTV 24/7.
Welcome to our special show where we're going to look at the severe impact this last year has had on children and their education, especially children in the early grades, and the challenges that lie ahead. While there have been many creative attempts to keep the learning process going through distance learning and online classes, the other big challenge now will be to get the children back to school, which are expected to reopen sometime next year if the vaccine arrives. Now, it's already estimated that a huge number of children may actually drop out, especially girls. During this crisis, Room to Read organization has been campaigning to help the most vulnerable children and maintain their links with learning, but a lot more help is needed to enable and ensure that every child completes their education. Well, to talk more about these issues, we're now joined by Manish Sisodiya, Deputy Chief Minister and Education Minister of Delhi, Nandita Das, actor and director and someone who's very passionate about these issues, Saurav Banerjee, country head, Room to Read, and Anil Swarup, author and former Secretary Government of India, someone who's been the former Education Secretary. Thank you all for joining us today. Now, a first question to you, Saurav. As an organization that's been working in many primary schools across the country, tell us about how difficult this last year has been and what do you foresee as the major challenges ahead?
I think the biggest challenge once children get back to school is children's getting back to school itself, because we are expecting that a number of children would probably drop out after the pandemic, because as you know, a lot of families has been under financial distress during this COVID period. People have lost their jobs, people have their businesses have gone bad. So and it's very we have seen it in earlier occasions also. Whenever a family is in financial distress, the first thing they do is withdraw their children, and especially if it's a girl child, from the school. The second big challenge, I think, once children come back to school, how to deal with the learning losses, because children who have been out of school for the last 6, 7, 8 months, obviously there's going to be a huge loss in their learning once they're back to school. So it's important, that's going to be a big challenge, how the system responds to meet these losses. And thirdly, I think the other challenge would be just to get the children readjusted to the schooling system, because again, a child, especially if it's a small child who has not been in school for the last 8 months, if she is coming back to school now, there is a bit of adjustment that needs to be done at the child's level as well.
All right, and I'd like to now go across to Mr. Manish Sisodiya. Sir, if you can tell us, when do you estimate schools in Delhi will reopen? That's a question everyone's asking. And for you, what are the major challenges ahead?
चुनौती सबसे बड़ी यही है कि अभी जब तक वैक्सीन नहीं आती, हम स्कूल नहीं खोल सकते हैं, बच्चों को स्कूल में भेज नहीं सकते हैं, क्योंकि हम सब ये जानते हैं कि हम चाहे जो प्रोटोकॉल बना लें, हम चाहे जो नियम बना लें, कागज़ों में हम चाहे कुछ लिख लें, लेकिन बच्चे जब स्कूल जाएंगे और 40-40, 50-50 बच्चे एक क्लास में बैठेंगे, तो उसके बाद उनके बीच किसी भी तरह की डिस्टेंसिंग कराना, उनके लिए मास्क लगाना, एक दूसरे की कोई भी उनमें एक भी कैरियर हुआ अगर वायरस का, तो वो सबको वायरस हो जाएगा। और ये गोवा से लेके उत्तराखंड तक में हम देख रहे हैं, जहाँ जहाँ स्कूल खुले हैं वहाँ प्रॉब्लम हुई है। तो हम किसी बच्चे के साथ कोई रिस्क नहीं लेना चाहते। तो जब तक वैक्सीन नहीं आएगी, पूरी तरह से स्कूलों का खोलना बहुत मुश्किल है।
Now, Nandita, what's very concerning about, the speculation regarding children returning to school is how many girls aren't expected to actually return to school. And I know betterment of, the girl child is something that you've been very passionate about. If you could tell us about your views on this, and also you managed to visit a Room to Read library. Tell us about that.
Yes, I've known about Room to Read for long, and I've also visited one of their centers. And I know they've been doing really good work, and I think we all have to support organizations that are bringing children back to school in some form or the other, digitally or otherwise. As we know, the pandemic is not just a public health issue, it has disrupted the whole social structure. Girls and women are the first who are going to be affected by it. The first cutbacks are going to be on poor families, are going to be on the education of their daughters. and this is because, you know, they are most dispensable. They are burdened with additional household chores. They don't have access to technology. Even if they have access, it's given mostly to the boys, the preferential treatment to boys. So girls are really going to be the first casualty. So I'm glad that, you know, you're doing this campaign, and hope many will support to ensure that the dropout rate, which already is very high for girls, is not going to get worse.
And as a parent, you know, this last couple of months has been very challenging. There have been these online classes. It's also brought to the fore the digital divide. Tell us what your experience has been with this.
I mean, it has been difficult. There's no question about it. You know, till this time, we used to always tell our children that, you know, don't be in front of the screen. The whole battle was about doing less screen. I don't even have a television at home, and, you know, we have very regulated screen time. And now everything is on screen, and there's so much that when children are young, everything, you know, needs to be more tactile, needs to have a human contact. So it's been very, very challenging to be able to do online, but, you know, we are resilient, and also we are so privileged. There's a huge divide. I mean, while we can complain, but it's still sort of, you know, as they say, first world problems. We have a whole lot of children who have absolutely no access to any education.
Right. Anil Swaroop, what do you have to say on this issue? As you know, we've been talking about the challenges that have been faced, the challenges ahead. Do you think the government is equipped for this to ensure that, you know, no child is left behind?
This is an unusual situation right now. I don't think anyone visualized that it would turn out to be as bad as it has turned out to be. The government is trying its best. But since it is still not known till when this will continue, so you can plan, and you can only implement it when the situation is such. I do understand that some of the senior colleges have started opening up, but still difficult times, because I know of a number of places where after having opened up these schools and colleges, there has been trouble. So one has to keep one's fingers crossed and hope that COVID goes away as quickly as possible. Government is certainly equipped, but you can't do much in a situation like this.
Now, Saurav, we know that most children in the country lack foundational literacy. The recently launched National Education Policy termed it as a learning crisis. How real do you think this threat is, and why is foundational literacy so important?
I think, as you know, I mean, anything that has a strong foundation will have a good superstructure, right? I mean, if it applies for a building, it also applies for education. If the foundation of education is strong, those children go on to become better learners in their future years. So it's very important to focus on the foundational literacy skills. And among the skills that you focus on in foundation, as foundation skills, literacy and the ability to read is the prime among them, because if you're not able to read, you would probably not be able to access any of the curriculum. Even for answering a maths problem, you need to first know how to read that problem, right? Unfortunately, in our country, we have been reading reports even before the pandemic that our children are not able to read at the grade levels that they ought to. I mean, we have heard of reports which says that 50% or more than 50% of the children in grade 5, they are not even able to read a grade 2 textbook. So the situation is pretty grave, and I think it's important therefore to focus on the foundation literacy skills once the schools open, to build that strong foundation on which a future education system can thrive.
Now, Nandita, we were talking about, you know, children and encouraging their love for literature, encouraging this reading habit. This is something Room to Read has been pushing among our schools to, you know, sort of change the way they think about education and what education really means. How important do you think this is?
Well, it's very important, but you know how there's so few libraries in government schools. I used to work with an organization years ago called Alaripu, and I've had first-hand experience with these government schools. In fact, sometimes if they have books, they're brand new. They don't want them to tear, which means they don't want them to, you know, give it even to children. So I do hope that we can really have a book drive, because all of us have books that are now obsolete as our kids grow older. and we are constantly giving out books that, let's say my son is running out, or has read already. If we could create really community centers in various areas where we could have little libraries, use maybe our compounds and create that whole culture of borrowing, keeping it, and children can be very responsible. Once they know they're supposed to be responsible, they will absolutely keep the books very well. And if we could really do more of that, even in an informal way, or find structures, maybe Room to Read can further diversify and get volunteers. I would love to volunteer for something like that, where we can some storytelling, reading. I've done some storytelling on the digital device, through Zooms, etc. But maybe in person we can, as the pandemic sort of hopefully goes off by mid next year, we should start maybe doing more of that.
And if we talk about the past, there's been a lot of talk about how many of our children lack those foundational literacy skills. And this is something of a crisis, in fact. Why do you think this has been? Why haven't we managed to equip our children better? Now we're talking a lot about reading. Room to Read has been encouraging that, at least for the children, especially in the early years, to have that level of literacy.
The foundation literacy has been talked about since quite some time. It's not the first time that it is being talked about. It's not now that it is being talked about. The problem, as it happens with a number of government schemes, is in the case of implementation. And I'm so glad that we have NGOs like Room to Read who have done such phenomenal work. And what really needs to be done, which I tried to do as Secretary of Education, Government of India, when I was there, to bring this public and private together, because I have often believed that the efficiencies will come from the private domain, from the NGOs, and the scale will come from the government domain. The suspicion that one has of the other, government of NGOs, NGOs of the government, we have to take care of that by looking at examples like that of Room to Read, where they have managed to scale a good practice along with this in the governments. So it's a great example of public-private partnership, and such partnerships actually need to grow with the help of NGOs, because government alone cannot bring about that change, and NGOs alone obviously cannot bring about that change. The two coming together, again, as I keep saying, NGOs like Room to Read have done phenomenal work, and there's a lot to learn from them and replicate and scale these models.
Has also spoken about a national foundational literacy and numeracy mission. Now, what do you think should be the focus of this mission?
It should focus on a few things. One, of course, is to create a salience about foundational literacy across the system, from education officials to teachers to parents to children everywhere. There's this perception even among education officials that foundation literacy is not a big deal. So I think that requires to change, because it's one thing to know a language, it's a very different thing to be able to read and write in that language. Even for parents, a lot of parents probably have this idea that grades 1 and 2 are not important. The child can skip a few days in school and it's all right. So I think even at the level of parent, they need to know why is it important to have foundational literacy. So again, the foundational literacy mission can play a big role there. Finally, I think what the mission should also focus on is, as I said, the provision of teaching learning materials. That's very key in foundational literacy development. Storybooks, like go and see any school in any developed country, any primary school would be full of literature, colorful books, activity sheets, drawings, so many things. Our schools are so drab in that sense. So I think there's a huge lack of children's literature and good children's literature, and that is something that this national mission should be focusing on.
Sir, if you could tell us, about your assessment of how many children, once the schools open, how many children are you expecting to come back? How many children are you expecting will not come back? Because this has been something that many NGOs have been worrying about.
देखिए, बच्चे तो आज जो घर पे बैठे हैं वो सब स्कूल आना चाहते हैं. उनका मन है कि बहुत दिन हो गए बैठे बैठे, मन से भी और ज़रूरत भी है कि उनकी पढ़ाई को जो नुकसान हो रहा है उसकी भरपाई आसान नहीं है होना. लेकिन उनका स्वास्थ्य एक माता पिता होने के नाते, एक गार्जियन होने के नाते हमारे लिए बहुत ज़रूरी है। अगर बच्चे स्वस्थ ही नहीं रहेंगे और उनके स्वास्थ्य को इतना बड़ा रिस्क होगा तो हम अभी फ़िलहाल नहीं चाहेंगे कि उन्हें स्कूल बुलाया जाए। तो इसलिए कोई असेसमेंट हम इस तरह का नहीं कर रहे हैं कि कितने बच्चे आ सकते हैं या क्या है। हमारा कुल मिला के एक डिसीजन है गवर्नमेंट का कि हम एक पेरेंट की तरह से डिसीजन लेंगे, क्या इतने संकट के समय में हम अपने बच्चे को, मेरा भी बच्चा स्कूल जाता है, क्या हम अपने बच्चे को स्कूल भेजना चाहेंगे। मैं कहूँगा मैं अपने बच्चे को रिस्क उठाने के लिए तैयार नहीं हूँ। तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि दिल्ली का कोई पेरेंट अपने बच्चे को रिस्क उठाने के लिए तैयार होगा।
And especially if we talk about the girl child, sir, that has been a big worry. What is the Delhi government going to do on that?
ये बात सही है, ये थोड़ा अनफॉर्चुनेट है, लेकिन एक कड़वा सच है कि हमारे समाज में लड़कियों की पढ़ाई को आज भी, जबकि हम 21st सेंचुरी में रह रहे हैं, थोड़ा सा पीछे रखा जाता है। घर में लड़का और लड़की पे जब पैसा खर्च करने की बारी आती है तब भी बहुत सारे परिवार ऐसे हैं जो अभी भी सोचते हैं कि लड़के को अच्छी पढ़ाई दे दो और लड़की को काम चलाओ पढ़ाई दे दो। या अब जब ऑनलाइन सिस्टम हो रहा है तो घर में अगर एक ही मोबाइल है तो वो परिवार का, कुछ परिवारों का ऐसा डिसीजन रहता है कि लड़के को वो उपकरण दे दिया जाए और लड़की थोड़ा किसी तरह से अपना काम चला ले या सेकेंडरी तरीके से कर ले। तो आपकी बात एकदम सही है। तो स्कूल जब खोलेंगे तो उनको, चाहे वो लड़के हों या लड़की, पर विशेषकर लड़कियों के लिए भी, क्योंकि उनकी ऑनलाइन क्लासेस में भी बहुत कमी रही होगी, ये कंसीडर करते हुए ही कोर्सेज पिछले साल के या जो छूट गया है इस लॉकडाउन के समय का, स्कूल लॉकडाउन के समय का कोर्स जो है, उसको रिवीजन कैसे कराया जाएगा, उसका रिफ्रेश कैसे कराया जाएगा, इसकी स्ट्रेटेजी बनाने के लिए मैंने डिपार्टमेंट को कहा हुआ है। पर एक बार तस्वीर साफ हो कि लगभग कब तक स्कूल खुलेंगे तो उस हिसाब से हम बना सकते हैं। पर जब तक वैक्सीन नहीं है तब तक हम कुछ भी आकलन करने की स्थिति में नहीं है।
Right, Mr. Anil Swaroop, now this entire pandemic we've been talking about, these last couple of months and the digital divide that has come to the fore. How big a setback has this been? As Nandita was pointing out, this is not even being counted as a 0 year. Many parents and students don't want that. But how big of a setback is it for those in, the lower classes, the early classes rather, the younger grades, for them to lose out this 1 year or, attempt to do this digital learning?
See, I look at the positives of what is happening. Yes, there has been a problem. Children have not been able to go to the school. Obviously, it will not be a 0 year. I think almost all the children will be promoted. But there is a positive part to it. What this has done is brought back the understanding about the technology. And I'm certain that the digital divide that we have today, or we had a few months ago, it's going to be bridged pretty fast, because the government, as well as everyone else, has realized that technology has to reach out to everyone. If broadband was to go down to village level, say next 5 years, I think it will be done much faster, because that realization has dawned that we have come to a situation where we can reach out to a lot of people, especially children, through technology in case they are unable to reach out to them physically. So in that sense, COVID is a blessing in disguise. It is pushing everyone to look at technology. But fact of the matter is, as on date, there is a huge divide. Because in some places in urban areas primarily, you are able to reach out to these children and take those classes. I know many such classes being taken, but there are very innovative practices that are coming up for areas where internet is not available, where smartphones are not available. In fact, as chairman of Nexus Good, we had a workshop where a number of schools, colleges and areas shared the innovative steps that they are taking in terms of reaching out to children where internet does not reach and where there are no smartphones. So in a way, it is a challenge to everyone, and it's also an opportunity for everyone to look at new ways to reach out to children and others.
Sort of children in India already lack foundational literacy skills, and then you've had this last year with the pandemic and them losing out on this learning. How should we then deal with children once they are back at school?
Yeah, it is. I mean, once children are back to school, I think of course the first few days or weeks maybe would definitely go to kind of get them feel comfortable in the school environment, because they've lost the habit of schooling, actually, most of them. And once they come back, you have to really get them to kind of into the habit of schooling. That's one key thing. But once that is done, I think what is required is again a very structured approach to make up for the learning losses that the children has suffered. Revising on, so for a child who is now in grade 2, she has to be taught all what they have not learned in grade 1, and then also learn the grade 2 curriculum. So I think that requires effort from the entire education system to be able to deliver on that. One thing nobody should do, I guess, is to rush to complete the curriculum and syllabus. I mean, that's been a tendency for most of our teachers, that if a child is in grade 2, the first effort is to complete the syllabus of grade 2 without acknowledging that the child has not even developed grade 1 competencies. So I think we need to be patient, do not rush to kind of overload the child with a whole lot of academic inputs now that the school is open. Take things one at a time, get the child comfortable, and then build on the skills that they've lost, and not were received in the earlier grade, and then go on to the new class is what I would suggest.
Thank you so much all for joining us on the show, and thank you those watching at home. As you can see, this is a big challenge that needs to be faced not just by the government but by society as a whole, so that no child is left behind when it comes to their education.